Make sure the stream is up and we'll start. Okay, there we go. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Very good. Make sure that's working. Looks good. Welcome to you all. Welcome also to all of you attending the Satsang online. We have a lot of great questions again. Let me apologize in advance for not being able to get to all the questions. There are too many. And as always, we'll alternate between questions from our online community and locally here in New Jersey. Okay, we've got lots of questions online here. First from Ravi, who lives in Chennai. And he asks, there are two metaphors we often use in Advaita Vedanta, the gold ornament and the rope snake. And we say the gold ornament is nothing but gold. If you have 10 gold rings, you have one gold. So that's one metaphor that we frequently use. And rope snake, of course, such a common metaphor. In a dark alley, you see a snake, but it's only a rope. You superimpose the snake on the rope due to your ignorance. And he asks, Ravi's question is, would it be accurate to say that the ornament metaphor has a higher order of reality than the snake metaphor? And if there's a difference between these two metaphors, is which more accurately describes the Advaitic point of view? I'm glad Ravi has asked this question because it points to something that you may not have understood about metaphors. Metaphors are tools. In Sanskrit, we call them prakriyas, methods of teaching. And one thing about a tool, you already know this, if there's a nail sticking out of a piece of furniture, do you grab a screwdriver? If there's a loose screw someplace, you grab a hammer. So the point of a tool is there's an appropriate tool for a particular application. Advaita Vedanta's use of metaphors falls into that same kind of category. There's no higher order or lower order. There's no metaphor that more accurately describes Advaita Vedanta or less accurately describes Advaita Vedanta. Metaphors are tools, and these tools have to be used in appropriate situations. So the metaphor of 10 gold rings, but one gold, that metaphor is to show the oneness of the underlying reality because of which everything exists. One Brahman is manifest as countless names and forms, is what the metaphor, one gold, manifest as 10 rings. On the other hand, the metaphor of the rope snake shows something entirely different. There's no connection at all between these two, I won't say at all. Their purpose of these two metaphors is completely different. The second metaphor, the rope snake metaphor, is used to show the problem of ignorance. Ignorance is not demonstrated in the gold ornament example. That metaphor shows a fundamental substratum, underlying substratum. Rope snake doesn't show anything about a fundamental substratum. It shows the power of ignorance. Ignorance has the power to prevent us from seeing what is already present, and it causes us then to misinterpret our experience. So metaphors are methods, prakriyas, which have to be wielded carefully in Advaita Vedanta. It's often said, we just make this point, this is one of the reasons that studying Advaita Vedanta independently from the original sources, like from Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita, may not be effective because you have to not only recognize the metaphors, you have to use them properly. And so it would be, to do things independent. I'm thinking about tools. Suppose you take it upon yourself to do some electrical repairs in your home. And you bring out your screwdriver and your pliers and all of this, and you work on the wiring. I hope you know what you're doing. So the point is that to use tools requires a level of skill, and to properly use the teachings of Vedanta similarly requires a level of skill. And for this reason, independent study may not be effective unless you already have those particular skills. Okay, next question from Arun, who lives in Bangalore. In an earlier satsang, you mentioned having practiced both Bhagavan Ramana Maharishi's self-enquiry and Vedantic self-enquiry, and that both of them worked. Little misnomer. This is not to say that that Ramana Maharishi's self-enquiry is not Vedantic. It's completely Vedantic. But it is, maybe we could say that Ramana Maharishi's method is a subset of Advaita Vedanta. In other words, Shankara and all traditional teachers will use a very elaborate scheme of different modes of self-inquiry. That's why we have these very long texts. Ramana is not famous for long texts. Ramana is famous for pithy statements and very brief instructions. The typical story is that a great scholar would go and see Ramana Maharishi and spend 5 minutes describing his question and all the details, using all complicated Sanskrit terms. So after 5 or 10 minutes, the scholar concludes his question, and Ramana's reply is this. So he was famous for this reply. He says, "You will find your answer when you find out who is asking the question." So he would bypass this whole complicated thing and point to a very simple process of self-inquiry. And that process of self-inquiry, he, of course, Tamil was his language, and I don't know. What is, I know the 2 words, non-yar. That's about the extent of my Tamil. How about that? I know that one, non-yar. So who am I? And that was kind of the essence of Ramana's self-inquiry. He would use a little different language. He would say, find out the source from which the sense of I-ness arises. Who am I is a little oversimplified, and no doubt he used that expression, but this is a more nuanced expression he used more often. Find out the source from which your sense of I-ness arises. So this was his method of inquiry. Can you elaborate more on this practice and its practical applications? I'm not sure practical applications. This is Advaita Vedanta. It's not. I don't think anyone would say Advaita Vedanta is practical in a worldly sense. But that particular practice, first of all, requires you to understand what is the sense of I-ness. ahankara in Sanskrit, or ahamvritti, the mental event of I-ness. The only way to really understand what is I-ness is through its absence. And the example, you may have heard me give this before, the I-ness goes away at times of absorption. For example, if you listen to some wonderful music and you found yourself getting lost in that music, who got lost? You still hear the music. You're still there, very much there. That which gets lost in that moment of absorption is that sense of I-ness. That's a really very experiential way of knowing what is ahankara. What is that we call ego in English, but I prefer that word sense of I-ness. It's kind of more, the ego means so many different things, and Freud had a very different meaning for ego. So we will stay with this sense of I-ness. So that sense of I-ness is present right now. Imagine you were absorbed in music, and then you came out of that state of absorption. Why did you come out of that state of absorption? Your cell phone rang. And I have to answer the cell phone. So in that situation, that sense of I-ness arises. How? And from where? Of course, the sense of I-ness arises from the same place that all mental activities arise. All of your thoughts, all of your emotions, all of your perceptions, everything you experience arises from the same locus, we can call it. And the locus from which all that arises is simply consciousness. The consciousness which is your essential nature. So when Ramana taught that who am I contemplation, he was intending he was describing a practice in which you reflect on the source from which all your experiences arise. And he focused on the experience of I-ness. Then, that was Arun. Next is from Om Prakash, who lives in Texas. Question: does meditation ever culminate, or is it an ongoing process? Many people think that the practice of meditation culminates in samadhi. And that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks in spiritual life. So, samadhi is an experience which you may or may not experience through your practice of meditation. May not is okay because no one, scriptures properly understood do not say that samadhi is necessary for the sake of enlightenment. Scriptures do not say that. Many teachers say that, and many modern books, translations, etc., may say that. But that really is a misunderstanding, and it's mistaken because samadhi, like any other experience, is transient, comes and goes. So you can enter into samadhi. It's profound, absolutely profound, no doubt, but then it comes to an end. And the question is, after that profound experience comes to an end, are you transformed in any fundamental way? And the surprising answer is No. And allow me to give a kind of a crude example. So when I was growing up in the 1960s and 70s, lots of drug use, and that was part of my culture. So I remember using LSD and other powerful drugs that would give the most amazing experiences. Just mind-blowing. What that's where the term came from in those days. And they called it, in fact, the expression we used back in those days, you have to expand your mind, man. How to expand your mind? Take this. Oh, it's really good. This is our culture at that time. So I had all these amazing experiences, and when it was over, it was over. I was the same immature teenager after the drug use that I was before. Why should that experience change you in a substantial way? We've all been through many experiences, wonderful and terrible experiences. And here we are. The wonderful experiences haven't made us glow brightly right now. The terrible experiences we've been through, are you still crying? No. As wonderful or terrible as those experiences were, what does it mean for right now? Yes, they left their mark. They left their mark because we learned from those experiences. What did I learn from those drug experiences? You would say, kuch nahi. Nothing. Bilkul. Not a thing. It's like, it's like you go to a movie and you see all of this amazing stuff and then it's over. So you don't necessarily learn from your experiences, and you most certainly are not transformed permanently by experiences, no matter how wonderful or terrible they are. Again, think about it. We've been through these wonderful and terrible experiences. They've left their mark, but we are more or less still the same person. So the point is that to think that meditation culminates in samadhi and that's over, this is very short-sighted. Even in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the standard text on meditation, Patanjali himself does not say that it's what do they say? One and done. That is, you have that samadhi and then it's over. He doesn't say that. He says there's a process of removing samskaras that you have to go through in order to gain liberation. So this is a very common but short-sighted conception that meditation culminates in samadhi. Is it an ongoing process? Absolutely. Because meditation is a tool that helps your mind. If you want your mind to be calm, to be focused, to be attentive, and to be capable of self-enquiry, atma-vichara, which is the essential practice in Advaita Vedanta. If you want your mind to be prepared for all of that, meditate. And if you want your mind to be even better prepared for all of that, meditate more and more and more. Because your mind will then get better and better prepared. Who doesn't want a calm, focused, attentive mind? Is there any person? Oh, I don't. So the ongoing practice of meditation would be very, very helpful. One more question here. This is from Vic. Vic lives in England, West Yorkshire. And Vic asks, what is the difference between human love and divine love? And to answer the question, we need to use a little bit more precise language. What is divine love? And different people will define it differently. So we can use the language of the Bhagavad Gita to describe the difference between human love and, let's call it well, we'll stay with it. Vic uses the word divine love. So how can we differentiate them? According to the Bhagavad Gita and other texts, human love, ordinary love, is always associated with attachment, asakti. I love you is true, but I need you is also true. Both are true. I love you, and my well-being depends on you. That's attachment. I need you, my well-being depends on you. That's attachment. So I love you, and I need you, and it's not just I need you to do this, I need you to do that. I need you not to do this. You see where that goes. So sometimes we call that, and we have to add something. And if you don't do what I need you to do, then I won't love you anymore. What kind of love is that? It's called conditional love. Love with conditions, love with certain requirements, as opposed to unconditional love. Now, unconditional love is an ideal. If we just use that term, unconditional love, for many people, it's an empty concept. So let's try to fill it with some meaning. So if we start off with human love, I love you and I need you. Suppose we got rid of the I need you part. I love you, and because through the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, I've discovered that my true nature is perfectly full and complete. Therefore, I don't need you in an emotional sense. I don't need anything. I find myself perfectly full and complete. Therefore, I love you, and instead of needing anything from you, because I am so full and complete, it's effortless for me to give to you. So if we can take that human love, which is always mixed up with that attachment, if you remove the attachment, it's just simple, pure love, uncontaminated by attachment. Notice that attachment is what you get out of it. In every relationship, what do you get out of it? But the unconditional love, the love that's free from attachment, is you don't get anything. And you don't need anything. So it's a love of just pure giving. Not taking, but pure giving. We'll take one more question here, and then we'll take questions here. This question from Neil. Neil, who lives in North Carolina. Neil says, some teachers say that by doing punya karma, good religious deeds, we can offset, mitigate, or even entirely eliminate the results of our sinful deeds committed either in this life or prior lives. Is this true? There's a problem with the word true. Pardon me for being fussy here, but the doctrine of karma is a matter of belief. Therefore, you can't use words like true or false. True or false refer to matters of fact. Doctrine of karma is not a matter of fact, it's a matter of belief. Now, so you can't say, is this true? What we can say is, what is conventionally believed? That answer we can't say what is true. What we can say is what is commonly believed, and what is commonly believed is this. Generally, if you've committed a sinful deed, you are bound to suffer the consequences of that deed. There's no, with one small exception, there's no such thing as a karmic eraser. Meaning, if you have caused some harm to someone, you will suffer the consequences of that harmful action. There's no karmic eraser, there's no get out of jail free card, whatever these things might be. So you do the action, you suffer the consequences. The one exception, perhaps, according to the doctrine of karma, if you're doing a ritual and you make a mistake in the ritual, there's such a thing as prayashchitta karma, which is a specific ritual deed that you do to erase the negative effects of the mistake that you made in doing that ritual. So that's a very limited case, and that's called prayashchitta karma. But in general, when you commit a sinful deed, you will either later in this life, and if not then, in some future life, you will suffer the consequences of that harmful deed. Then why do teachers say that you should do good karmas? Well, and Neil said, use all these nice words. We can offset, mitigate, or entirely eliminate the effects of those sinful deeds. So entirely eliminate, we just crossed that one off. Offset or mitigate, fancy words, but they apply nicely here. And that is, if you've accumulated a lot of bad karmas, which means it's going to bring a lot of difficulty and suffering into your life, if you intentionally commit a lot of good karmas to accumulate good things in life, the good karmas can help you deal with the consequences of your bad karma more easily. is what it comes to. You will suffer the consequences. But, and he uses the word offset or mitigate. Those are appropriate words. So good karmas means you are empowered in some way in that you can cope with the effects of your bad karmas more gracefully without so much suffering. So is this true? And we can't say it's true, we can't say it's false. We can say, according to the doctrine of karma, this is what is believed. Okay, do we have some questions here? Raise your hands. Okay, we'll start here.
So I was thinking, like enlightenment won't cure mental illnesses, right? But suppose someone that has OCD discovers that they're nothing can, like they're fully content and whatnot. So then when they're doing the ritual, then they realize that they're already content, so they have no reason to do it. Then wouldn't it kind of cure once they become enlightened?
Your question isn't very clear. You want to try again?
Well, no, I'll just ask.
I didn't follow the logic of the question.
I'll just ask afterwards.
No, it's okay. Let me try to respond to what I think is inside your question. And thank you. You keep forgetting to do that. Good. You correctly said that enlightenment does not cure mental illness. Mental illness is like, if you're diabetic and you're enlightened, then does enlightenment cure diabetes? That doesn't make any sense at all. So if there's an illness of the body, it can't be treated through Vedanta. And if there's an illness or problem of the mind, it can't be specifically handled through the teachings of Vedanta. On the other hand, if your body or mind are causing you great pain, and if you're enlightened, your attitude will shift entirely. Thank goodness, the problem belongs to my body and mind. Because if these problems really affected me, I'd be in bad shape. But these problems don't truly affect me. That's enlightenment. Enlightenment is to experience the problems of the body and mind and not to truly be affected by them. Does it mean that an enlightened person can have problems in the mind? Can an enlightened person have problems in the body? Yeah? Then why not problems in the mind? They're all natural. Physical problems are natural. Mental problems are natural. Every human being will have physical and mental problems. So an enlightened person is no longer a human being? Come on. So anyway, the enlightenment then doesn't solve the problems, but rather transforms your relationship with those problems so that you are content in spite of the problems. Even while the problems persist, they don't throw you off. They don't make you suffer. Now, does it mean, and this is what I'll try to address your question, if an enlightened person has diabetes and they're not, the problems of the body don't affect them. So therefore, suppose an enlightened person says, well, it's just the body is not me, so why should I bother taking insulin? Problem that could lead to a variety of terrible outcomes. Terrible outcomes. Untreated diabetes can lead you to, kidney failure, eyesight failure, amputation of limbs. Yeah, bad out and probably kill you before your natural end of your life. So untreated diabetes, serious diabetes, is something terrible. Tell me, why would an enlightened person allow that to happen? Would an enlightened person allow that to happen to you? If you tell an enlightened person, I'm not going to treat my diabetes, that enlightened person would convince you to deal with it. So if that enlightened person recognizes in a very pragmatic way how it can affect your body, then what about this one? Same thing. So an enlightened person will not choose to ignore the problems of the body, but will have a very pragmatic attitude. If the body needs some insulin, give it some insulin. In the same way, the enlightened person will have a very pragmatic attitude with the mind. If the mind has some problems, and if the problems are of a nature that they require some kind of professional intervention, then fine, why not? Get that professional. Suppose the problem requires some kind of psychoactive medications. Okay, insulin is a medication for the body. Sometimes these psychoactive meds are necessary to handle certain problems in the mind. It's just a fact. It's a pragmatic issue. That would be the attitude of an enlightened person. Okay, any other questions here? Not today? Yeah, in back here. Yeah, in back, please. Yes.
You were talking about the unconditional love, and I have a question about that.
Yes. Microphone, please.
Oh, sorry. It also reminded me of a debate I had about altruism, which I feel like it's very similar to giving without receiving. Is that actually possible?
There's a common misconception about altruism. Altruism means you adopt a thinking or lifestyle. Thank you. I'm consistent. You adopt an attitude of giving, giving, giving. Why? Why does a person choose to be altruistic? You can answer that, right? You can. You choose to be altruistic because it makes you feel good. If being altruistic didn't make you feel good, you wouldn't. You wouldn't give anything to anyone. So conventional, by the way, this is not to criticize altruism, because we have, from the standpoint of dharma, we have all been blessed in various ways, and whatever we've been blessed with, we have a moral and ethical responsibility to share with others. So, to whether or not you feel good about sharing with others, who cares? You have a moral and ethical responsibility to share whatever you've been given. So conventional altruism still has this attachment. You're attached to feeling good. You want to feel good about yourself. Again, that's not a criticism, it's just a fact. When parents love their children, is that love conditional or unconditional? Your adult child is going to college, and they say, I want to study French art. I want to, and parents generally won't be delighted by that. So look what happens when an adult child does something the parent doesn't want to do. It creates conflict. Why? Parents' love is not unconditional. It's conditional. Call it for what it is. The parents' needs are met through their relationship with their children. That's not wrong. It's natural. But it's also not unconditional love. So, love is what it is. Love is as imperfect as human beings are imperfect. What can we do? You can do the best you can. If you're enlightened, that's another story entirely. But until and unless you are enlightened, you do the best you can. So altruism is wonderful. It means you are inspired to be more giving, to be more generous. And the fact that your emotional needs are met through those altruistic actions, fine, good. If that makes you feel good, then maybe you'll give even more. So it's not a negative thing. Okay, a question here, please. What happened? Did the button on the bottom get pushed?
It's red.
It should be on. Speak into it. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just a follow up on the love, and especially the love of the parent comment. I would like, if it's possible, for you to elaborate a little more about that, because suppose I have a child and he's addicted, right? He's addicted to drugs, for instance. So he's doing something that affects himself and myself and creates conflict, right, and suffering. But the parent still loves him. It's not. So I want to just to understand a little bit better what you mean by the love of the parent is conditional. And what is this love? Because, I mean, thank God I don't have this problem, but if I did, I imagine I would still love I know people who have kids who have drug problems and they still love and want to help and want the best. And
You use the word conflict. That's really the key to answering your question, and that is, thank you, very consistent. If you're wondering, I keep forgetting to press this button over here. Okay. If your child has a cold, does that cause conflict? Not exactly. Right. You're concerned, and you want to make sure that your child is comfortable and taken care of. Well, a cold virus is a physiological problem. And according to most doctors today, addiction is a physiological problem. Maybe it's more dealing with the brain, but it's equally a physiological problem. Now, parents, and not just parents, anyone, can easily make a mistake of, let me preface this. When your child gets a cold, do you blame them? Actually, sometimes it happens. Mom will say, "See, you went out without your jacket." What is that? Your poor kid is suffering with a cold and mom is blaming. Anyway, you get, I know that happens, but it's not right. You don't blame someone for getting a cold. It happens. In the same way, you blame an adult child for addictive behavior. It's the same thing. And you might have to educate yourself about addiction, by the way. Many people don't really understand the chemical, the neurological basis for addiction. It's actually quite complicated. And many people don't understand the basis and not understanding the basis for addiction leads people to make this wrong assumption that you're not trying hard enough. And that's wrong. And it's hurtful, and it creates conflict and problems. And so this would be the example. So the parent, instead of wanting to help the child with the cold, blaming the child for the cold, and the parent, instead of helping with the addictive behavior, is blaming for the addictive behavior, and that's where the problem lies. An enlightened parent would not make that mistake. There would be no blame. There would be complete acceptance of the situation as it is. And complete acceptance means you also accept your responsibility to do whatever needs to be done. Don't think that complete acceptance is passivity. Complete acceptance includes accepting your responsibility. It's part of the package. So if you accept the situation completely, you also accept your responsibility to respond in the proper way. Go ahead.
Now, just so I agree completely with everything, but then it's not unconditional love. You still love, right?
As I said, the love is always mixed with that attachment. Human love is mixed with attachment, including love for one's child.
The core of my first question was, is there such thing as unconditional love?
Yeah, that's what enlightenment is all about. You lose that attachment. I suggested it before when I just said, when you discover yourself to be so full and complete, lacking nothing whatsoever, you don't need anything. No dependencies, no emotional dependency. That's lack of attachment. And it would seem that the only one who has that perfect, complete absence of attachment is one who's enlightened. Okay, let's take a few more questions online. Next question from Robbie. Robbie lives in Glasgow, Scotland. In the context of Advaita Vedanta, we understand that we are non-different from Ishvara, the ultimate reality. Should use the word Brahman, the ultimate reality. However, this raises a question about the nature of prayer. When we pray to Ishvara, it seems to create a dualistic relationship. Absolutely. You are praying to Ishvara, one you plus one Ishvara, dualism. Two. A sense of separation. So how are we to approach prayer with this understanding of non-duality? If you are enlightened, it's not an issue. Of course, if you were enlightened, you wouldn't be asking this question. So the fact that this question is being asked suggests that Robbie is not yet enlightened, hopefully very close. But in the meanwhile, if you're not enlightened, duality is a fact. Your relationship with Ishvara is a fact. And the importance of prayer is a fact. That all changes when you become enlightened, but until you're enlightened, then that prayer continues. It was suggested here, and I think there's another question later, which suggests, but Swamiji, the question would go like this, but Swamiji, doesn't prayer perpetuate that sense of duality? Again, that very question is said from the standpoint of not yet being enlightened. So when you're not yet enlightened, you want to become enlightened. Wanting to become enlightened, you need all the help you can get. Prayer is helpful. It's that simple. So if you're not yet enlightened, instead of arguing that prayer perpetuates duality, it would be better to say prayer is part of the life of one who is not yet enlightened, that prayer is helpful. That's all we need to recognize, instead of arguing that it's an obstacle. It's not prayer is never an obstacle to enlightenment. That doesn't make sense. Next question from Shiv in New York. Where are we here? Brahman is often described in paradoxical terms. It is attributeless, nirguna, and yet it can be conceived with attributes, saguna. It's not paradoxical because these are two different Brahmans, saguna Brahman and nirguna Brahman. Now, if you say paradoxical, you say, how can one Brahman, and this is where he means, how can that one Brahman be both to become attributeless? Let's see, how does your mind, to become attributeless, meditation attributes have to be dropped. Not sure what that means. How does the mind do that? The mind always has a query. Okay, the query with regard to Brahman, both being saguna and nirguna, we use these abstract terms, and sometimes those terms cover up a very simple truth. Is this a pot or is this clay? And the answer, of course, is yes. So, from the standpoint of reality, it's clay. From the standpoint of the world, it's pot. Is it complicated? Do you have to constantly remind yourself, am I talking about clay, am I talking about pot? It's very simple, it's very obvious. In the same way with regard to Brahman. Honestly, it's as simple and obvious as this clay pot. Here's how it is. There is an underlying reality because of which everything exists. That underlying reality, Brahman. Nirguna, Brahman. Underlying reality because of which everything exists. Underlying reality because of which you and I exist. Underlying reality because of which Ishvara exists. No problem. But there's also a second perspective, not from the standpoint of the underlying reality, clay, but from the standpoint of nama rupa, name and form. So there's a relationship between me and this pot. There's me and pot. In the same way, there's a relationship between you and Ishvara. You and Ishvara, too. Ishvara is saguna Brahman. Saguna Brahman is our fancy Vedantic term. It simply means Ishvara. Ishvara is creator, sustainer, destroyer, karma paladata, the giver of blessings, all of this. Ishvara has Brahman as its underlying reality. Nirguna Brahman is the substratum because of which Ishvara exists. And if you take that underlying substratum of Nirguna Brahman and give it the power to create, sustain, and destroy the universe, those are gunas. The power of creation is a guna. The power of sustenance, a guna. Destruction, guna. Being karma paladata, guna. These are all qualities. That is saguna Brahman. So maybe there's an advantage and disadvantage to the language we use in Advaita Vedanta. The advantage is clarity and precision. Absolutely, so much clarity and precision. But the downside, especially if we just, if we say there's a paradox between nirguna and saguna Brahman, the downside is we kind of get lost in these technical terms and fail to appreciate what they really point to. Question from Amit, who writes from India. Very good. My question is, how can one be fully dharmic in today's world and still function? Lawyers have to defend criminals. Salesmen in marketing have to sell a product by hook or crook to survive. Politicians, what to say? Politicians will not come to power if they don't grant promises. Okay, so is it possible to be fully dharmic in today's world and still function? Maybe function is a little tricky here. Is it possible to still function? Absolutely. Is it possible to be a dharmic lawyer? Well, if you don't want to defend criminals, then go practice copyright law or something. some other kind of law in which you're not required to defend criminals. Salesmen have to sell a product. Salesmen can be honest. They may not sell as much. But that brings us to the point. What's more important? If you're a salesman, is it more important to sell more, or is it more important to be dharmic? So, if you say, can you function as a salesman and still be dharmic? The answer is yes. Can you be the best salesman in the world and still be dharmic? No, let's be honest. In the same way for politicians. Can you be dharmic and be a politician? Gandhi was. Of course, Gandhi is a fairly controversial figure, but he was effective in certain ways where others could not be effective. On the other hand, there's any political strategy has shortcomings. So if you want to be a politician, and you want to be a absolutely dharmic politician, always being true to your promises, being completely transparent, and being completely untouched by all this financial stuff, you can be in politics like that. Will you become president? What an example, given the state of American politics. So we'll just drop it right there. So can you function? Yes. Can you climb to the top of the ladder, stepping on the fingers of all those who are clinging to the ladder to become number one and still be dharmic? No. But it's a matter of what's more important to you. Is it more important to you to be at the top of the ladder, or is it more important to be dharmic? And only you can make that decision. Okay, we'll take just one or two more, and then we'll wrap up here. This is a question from Sarah, who lives in Italy. Quite extensive. If Maya is an intrinsic feature of reality, does that realization of non-duality represent a shift in perception alone, or does it also involve transcending Maya as a fundamental characteristic of the world? I don't think we're going to get into the details of this is a very complex question. On my YouTube channel, if you haven't already watched Introduction to Vedanta, that's number one. There's a full video just on Maya. That would be number two. So instead of my trying to answer this question, it's very thoughtful, but I think better for Sarah, or if you have any of these questions about Maya, make sure you've watched that Introduction to Vedanta first, because definitions are important, and then there's at least one video on Maya. Then I think one more. We'll conclude here. This is from Prashanto, who lives in Bangladesh. He asks, people who, with other religions like Islam or Christianity, who do not have access to the ancient teachings of the Vedas and yoga and Bhagavad Gita, so they don't have access to these teachings. So my question is, how do people from other faiths get enlightened if they don't have access to the teachings of the rishis? Okay, and so it's a fair question. By the way, you should know that in all the world's traditions, there is a subset, not mainstream, but a subset of mysticism. There is Islamic mysticism, we usually call Sufi, Christian mysticism, brilliant stuff. You read Eckhart, Meister Eckhart, it's like reading Shankara, honestly. Of course, Meister Eckhart almost got thrown out of the church, and some Sufi saints were actually killed for what they taught. There was one famous Sufi who said, "I am God." Yeah. So much for that. So I'm being a little silly. I'm sorry. I think it's the time to end the satsang. And Jewish mysticism, every religion will have a subset which is not mainstream, which contains teachings which are similar to what is taught by the ancient rishis. And even in the Hindu tradition, is Advaita Vedanta mainstream for Hindus? Mm-hmm. So same relationship. So most Christians don't know who Meister Eckhart was. Most Hindus don't know, they do know who was Shankaracharya, but they don't know Shankara's teachings. So that's just a fact. So it's not mainstream. So then what is, I think there is something, however, unique. My first response to Prashanta's question is people in other religions do indeed have access to these same teachings through their mystic traditions, Sufism and the Christian mystics, etc., Kabbalah and the Jewish tradition. So they do have access, just as Hindus have access to Advaita Vedanta. On the other hand, it doesn't seem completely parallel. For Hindus, we would say Advaita Vedanta is not mainstream, but for educated Hindus, it's extremely well known and highly regarded. So, as opposed to educated Christians are not so inclined to go for Meister Eckhart, because Christianity is so focused on certain dogmas. They're actually discouraged by the church from going after these Christian mystics. On the other hand, in the Hindu tradition, there seems to, even though Advaita Vedanta is certainly not mainstream, I think it is a much bigger part of the Hindu worldview. And for that reason, and I think this is where Prashanta's question is going, and that is, all of you who were born in Hindu families, I think you had an advantage I didn't have, an advantage that most people don't have, to be born into a religion which is, this is a personal opinion, means you don't have to agree with me, but having been raised as a Christian and having been well exposed to other religious traditions, in my opinion, which you don't have to agree with, is that Hinduism has many, many benefits missing in other religious traditions. Benefits like not being confined to one particular form of God, not being confined to one particular dogma or doctrine, not being confined to seeing God as the punisher and rewarder, and you have to go to heaven and avoid eternal damnation. And more than anything else, the Hindu tradition embracing the doctrine of karma, which I think is so advantageous for helping people navigate the complexities of day-to-day lives. Those of you raised in Hindu families will take all of this for granted. I don't take it for granted at all. And I'd like to suggest that you need not take it for granted, but rather recognize it as something of tremendous value. I think that's a good place to conclude for today. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next time.